everyone. Welcome. My name is Lee Taylor, and we're going to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started today. Our session today is in Zoom webinar. That means that all attendees are muted and your videos are off. We are recording the session and it will be available soon. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen for questions. We will have time for questions and answers today. We are also going to enable auto transcriptioning, and I will do that as soon as I'm not sharing screen. If you don't see that, you can click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. We know that there may be technical difficulties, and we appreciate your patience as we encounter any today. Certificates of eligibility. You do not have to enter your contact information in the chat, as attendees and their time is tracked by Zoom. You must be in the content portion of the webinar for at least 90% of the session to be eligible for a certificate. This is a mandate by the boards. Please do not leave the webinar until the conclusion of the Q&A, as that counts as part of the session. You must use the same link to join as you received in your confirmation or your reminder email. If you received the link from a friend or coworker, we will not be able to track your attendance and you will not be eligible for a certificate. Also, you must use the same email address to register for each session. That is the unique identifier that we use to track your attendance for continuing education throughout the learning series. By the first full week of February, you'll receive an email from me that will provide a link to access the session evaluation, then your certificate. This is a screenshot of the landing page for the evaluations and certificates. You have to complete the session evaluation to proceed to the certificate. And lastly, you're responsible for printing your own certificate. We do not mail or email those anymore. This website houses several years of the System of Care Academy. So if you lose your certificate, you can go back to this website and print another. And now let's learn about our presenters. First, we have Gilliam, and she is a licensed psychological associate, not currently practicing, who first became involved in wraparound practice through Kentucky's Impact program in 2006. She's spent many years in clinical practice at a local community mental health center, using evidence-based practices with children, adolescents, adults, and families prior to joining Kentucky's implementation efforts for High Fidelity Wraparound in 2015. She has earned local coach certification from the National Wraparound Implementation Center. Kimberly is a native of Virginia and completed a bachelor's degree at Berea College prior to completing master's degrees in both clinical psychology and clinical mental health counseling at Eastern Kentucky University. She has been acknowledged as a doctoral degree candidate in counselor education and supervision at Eastern Kentucky University and looks forward to completion of her dissertation. And next we have Dr. Mikey Lewis, who is a licensed professional counselor and supervisor. He has many years of experience in local community mental health care settings and implementation of evidence-based practices for children, adolescents, adults, and families. He first became involved in wraparound practice through Kentucky's Impact program in 2004. He joined the High Fidelity Wraparound Implementation Project in 2015 and earned the National Wraparound Implementation Center's local coach certification. He's a native of Kentucky. He obtained a bachelor's degree at Berea College prior to completing a master's degree in mental health counseling and doctoral degree in counselor education and supervision at Eastern Kentucky University. Welcome, Kim and Mikey.
Hello, everybody. Let Lee get her process down, and we'll get started in a minute. So exciting to see this many people interested in hearing about wraparound. We got a lot to share with you all this afternoon.
We do. It looks like we've got people from all over the state, so that's exciting. I'm seeing some familiar names too. So hello, everyone.
So we actually have quite a bit that prepared to share with you. We have what we'll term our official presentation slides. These are the things that people like to have notes on. But we're going to have a conversation about what people think they know about Wraparound. And we initially had planned this as one of our breakout sessions at the System of Care Academy. But when we moved to this series format, we've adapted it to more of a question and answer with just Kim and I. So we'll have some other resources that we pull up as well.
Folks from other states as well. Awesome. Glad to have you here.
All right. So how to be a wraparound expert, right? Which is kind of a tongue-in-cheek way of saying what we're here to talk about. So we know that sometimes there's experts in the room. Our state has the benefit of a long history with the wraparound process. And that means that there's a lot of variance in the skill levels and understanding of wraparound around the state. So we imagine there's going to be some people who are brand new to the process, haven't really heard much about it. And then there may be people here who've known about and had something to do with wraparound for more than 20 years. So we're going to get us started with a poll. So we'd like to hear from everybody here. So this first poll question is, please choose what best describes your level of experience with wraparound. So this could range from having not heard much or any about it to you invented it and you're just here to make sure that we pay you your dues. Thank you for that one person. We'll talk later. All right, we got about 79%, 80% responded so far. Kim, do you know if our participants can see the results yet, or do we need to end the poll first and then they can see results?
We have to end the poll first for people to see results.
That's what I was thinking. All right. So I see a question's gone into the chat there, and maybe Lee can check that out for us.
It's someone responding to your poll. They said they have participated in it.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes these polls launch and depend on what device you're on, it can sometimes get covered up with other things or close out before you have a chance to answer it.
And just so everyone knows that's participating today, we will be checking the chat and the Q&A throughout. So you can use the chat box to ask questions or the Q&A, whichever you're more comfortable with. We'll try
we're not used to this fancy Q&A, right? We spend a lot of time in these Zoom rooms, but having an official Q&A that's a whole nother level.
Yeah, so it looks like a few people are still trying to answer, and lots of folks in the middle here have participated in Wraparound in the past. Nice. Hopefully this will help us gauge the information that we need to share, because we could go all sorts of directions with this, and we want to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind, and that we give you enough information so that you can feel comfortable that you have good information and can think about Wraparound in the way that we're presenting it today. Okay, so some folks have had some problems answering the polls because they weren't able to select any of the answers. That's okay. If you want to type it in the chat box, you're more than welcome, or we understand that sometimes these things don't work, as we've tried to manage and navigate work through Zoom for few years now, we know that everything isn't perfect all the time. All right, so we have one more facilitated wraparound.
We're gonna close it out, going once, going twice, going 3 times, and we are in. So we'll take just kind of a look so you all can see who's in the room. So we've got really the largest number of people who have participated in wraparound in the past. Next, we've got people who've heard about it but never been a part of it, followed by a group that have not heard much about it. So we've got a sizable, more than half, who have either not heard about it or have only heard about it. And you know, there's a small number who've actually been trained to lead or facilitate the wraparound process. So this is helpful for us to know in thinking about how we share our information as people who can definitely get into the weedy details of
Right.
What wraparound practice is.
Definitely. So
we
we
have
started out with saying how to be a wraparound expert. You won't be a wraparound expert when you leave here today, but hopefully you'll have some more information. We don't have time for that, right?
Yeah. And so we did have a second poll that we wanted to get in early, but given the answers to that one, I think that this one will not have a whole lot pop up that's different than that, but we'll give folks just a moment or two to give us an idea of this. So we'll know if we've got any of our folks who have some experience with what we call high fidelity wraparound.
So I learned from the Q&A box that some people who join from a Chromebook are not seeing the pop-up poll or the answers. So I'm going to read it to them real quick so that they can drop their answers in the chat. The question is, please choose what best describes your level of experience with high fidelity wraparound. And you've either not heard much or any about it, you have heard about it but never been a part of it, you've participated in high fidelity wraparound in the past, or you've participated in high fidelity wraparound trainings.
Thanks, Lee.
Now we won't spend as long collecting this one because I think the first question gave us the best idea, but it will give us an idea of how many folks have actually heard about this other level of wraparound. So, going once, going twice, going 3 times. So we'll end that. Anybody who wants to, finish your answer in the chat, please do. We'll take a quick look at that. So, more than half haven't heard anything about high fidelity wraparound, which is, we're glad to have you. We do want to talk about why there's that difference. And then there's some of you who've heard some about it, but never really experienced it. So you might have some questions about what you've heard. And then a small number, 20 or so, who either participated in some way with high fidelity wraparound, maybe as a team member, or have participated in trainings. So thank you all for your responses to those polls. It gives us an idea of who we've got in the room. And yeah, so there's no experts in wraparound, as it's an ongoing learning process. There are some of us who've spent more time in that classroom of wraparound than others and probably have more things to say about it. But, we all have something that we can contribute in a wraparound process. And so you don't have to be an expert for that. Our polling questions there. Kim, you want to jump in with any of these learning objectives?
Yeah, so you've probably seen these before when you signed up to join us today. But our goals today would be to ensure that you have some kind of idea around the implementation efforts for High Fidelity Wraparound within Kentucky. Then we give you enough information to think about where it's located, who's implementing it, and how that looks. We want you to be able to think about the different options for wraparound service within Kentucky, because we do have different programs that use wraparound. And so we want you to be familiar with those and understand the target populations for each. And what we do recognize is over the last few years, COVID really added a lot of challenges when it came to families accessing community services and resources. So our hope would be that we'll be able to share with you at least three ways that the High Fidelity Wraparound process really meets the needs and challenges of times when we don't really know what to do, the flexibility and how that has actually worked. So by the end of today, you will know at least these things and probably a lot more than that.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. So those are the things we're supposed to do. We hope you all keep us honest if you have questions about any of those specifically, because we want to make sure we do what we've been tasked with doing. So a little bit about who we think we are. My illustration is the bicycle crash there. About a year ago, my kids wanted to take up cycling as part of our way of dealing with sort of the world of social distancing and all of that. Biking seemed like a good idea. And I had bought a cheap bike at Walmart to join in with them, and they wanted to go out on this fancy mountain biking trail. And I was going over the ramps and looked really cool, my son said, until I crashed and was humbled yet again of what I thought I was able to do. It wasn't quite so much, and kind of banged up pretty bad and had a recovery. So to see the illustration of me with a bike, don't think that that's really my hobby. It's more something that I'm striving to be. And so Lee did a good job of kind of recapping our history of experience with wraparound. But really, there's a lot of humility to that. There's been some great things that I've been able to see in my experience with wraparound and the roles that I've played around it. But there's also been a lot of lessons learned. There's things about it that have helped me grow as a person, and that's part of why I'm here and who I think I am. So Kim, what about you?
Well, we have this really inappropriate picture of me looking like I'm a great golfer, right? But I think that one day I will be a great golfer. So when you see this, it reminds me of the beginning of this whole COVID shutdown, and things that I still could do that I enjoyed were very limited. Golf was one of those things that I could still do out in the community because I didn't have to have anybody near me. So I tried to develop some better skills. So it's something that I have an interest in. I have family who is really interested in golf and really loved to play, and a kid who got his college education based on his golf skills. So pretty impressed with that. But so historically, when I think about what brought me into wraparound, I recognized that there were just some spaces that weren't being filled for families, right? That there were things going on that were creating need for more people and more people and more people to get involved. And it wasn't really happening for families in a way that they appreciated or enjoyed it or really wanted to engage in it, in services when it came to mental health. So in my long career, I started partnering with Impact doing wraparound, as we called it then, and we still do have that name incorporated into much of what we do, and recognized that teaming was very helpful. And so I started shifting my focus to move to a space where I didn't have to be the expert in the room anymore. I didn't have to tell folks exactly what I thought they should do. And I could really rely on them to tell me what they thought might help them. And we could work together. So I'm really excited about talking about high fidelity wraparound today with everyone, and hopefully in the future, developing more golf skills.
Yeah, I will say one of the things that central to why I care about the wraparound process is really just that recognition that there's not books written about how to help a particular kid or a particular family. That there's been lots of research done, or there's been therapy models developed to help particular types of individuals or for particular types of problems. But every kid and family is different, has their own circumstances. And what really brings me back to wraparound all the time is that process, to really engaging them in a positive way, using things that they like to do and that they feel good about, and that there's an ongoing process to make adjustments so that you create a plan and you carry out the plan. If it doesn't work, it doesn't mean that we failed. It means that we need to adjust the plan. And that was something that I saw again and again as having relevance for the kinds of situations the kids and families were in with shifting circumstances in their community. And I think that's a big part of why we're here today. So our actual title is not how to be a wraparound expert, because we don't know how to tell anybody that. But it was, you think you know wraparound, take another look. So what were we thinking whenever we came up with that title?
Well, from our experience, or my experience for sure, over the last 7 years of implementing high fidelity wraparound, I recognize that most folks I talk to think they do know wraparound. And when you say, hey, we're going to do wraparound, they might have an idea of what it will look like. But it may not be the same idea as what we're planning to do. The process that we're going to use to partner with families looks different than what they may have known before or what they've heard about wraparound in the past. And so everybody has their own picture of what it should look like or what it will look like, or have their own experiences from engaging in wraparound previously. And so today, our hope would be that we can give you a little more information around high fidelity wraparound and what we're referring to when we talk about it, because we want that picture in your head to line up with what we're going to do when we do high fidelity wraparound. So this is a nice question for you, Mikey. How would you describe wraparound?
Well, I have a tendency to give a lot of speeches and get distracted with various things. So one of the things that we've worked on over the years is to try to have some ways to organize how you might explain what wraparound is. So we've got a couple of versions here. One is hand drawn and one is emojis, right? It helps to have some symbols to think about. So when I think about the wraparound process, I think it's engaging people with the things that they believe they're good at. Sometimes we refer to those as strengths, right? But we're engaging people with what they feel good about. We're also trying to understand what really drives them to do the things that they're doing that maybe are associated with what they were referred for some kind of intervention. So wraparound referrals tend to come from situations where there's questions about whether kids can stay in their community, stay with their families, whether people are going to be hurt, And those are some pretty big deals for people. And we have to have a sense of caring and loving for them for something positive to come from that. We're also trying to really build bridges between people. So we want to see some collaboration happen between the people that families have known and relied on over the years. They may be relatives, they may be next door neighbors, they may be family friends, they may be coworkers, or they may be peers of kids from school. But there's people that they're naturally connected to, and we refer to them as natural supports. But then we also have paid professionals, people who bring some expertise to the kinds of situations that maybe kids and families are facing. And we need to have them involved. So really, we're creating a team that has a balance of that kind of perspective and energy. So we've got our kids, we've got our family members, we've got those natural supports, we've got those paid professionals. We also have other members of the community who maybe have a connection to the family through some of their interests. So this is sometimes, sports team coaches or Cub Scout or Girl Scout leaders. It could be people from the local library, could be from the faith communities that might be involved. But when you get that team together, if you're not careful to focus on who's really driving this process, sometimes families get overshadowed by some of those other strong personalities. So Wraparound has to have a way of protecting family choices and preferences in the process. So we need to make sure that they have a voice to be heard and understood and respected. And families may be in different positions as far as how they know to express their voice or to get the things that they want, understood by others. But then, that's something that we're going to navigate with them to help them grow in that voice. So that's more of our microphone cue there. We also have an emergency, right? So there's often crisis situations. So we've got our emergency responder hat there, and we have to plan for the kinds of situations that result in kids being removed from homes, going into placements, families being separated from each other. And those kinds of plans can't just rely on the paid professionals. There are a different set of people who are available after 5 p.m. and on the weekends. And so those times need to be considered as well. So in a wraparound process, that crisis planning is going to look different and be more inclusive of the team of folks that you have identified. And lastly, we got a smiling face because wraparound has to be fun. It has to be innovative and creative, adjustable. It has to be something that families can buy into, people look forward to participating in. And of course, that sounds easy and great and all, but sometimes that's a real challenge to be able to pull off whenever folks are really tired and stressed out and worried. So that's kind of my way of describing wraparound. I know Kim's always got a few things that she could add or say a little different to help people understand better.
Yeah, what I really like is that when we think about wraparound, we don't have to have any type of formal anything, right? We've got pictures here. So any person who we might engage with would have the opportunity to understand what we're talking about. And that's really what wraparound is. Wraparound is individualized in a way that anyone can participate, and true partnerships can be created that way. When I think about wraparound and looking at those strengths, partnering with families in a way that their capabilities and their assets are highlighted, that things that they might be interested in, things that they've used to get through tough times before are acknowledged. And, oh, he's moving around so you can see my drawings. So I have to admit, the emojis were his and the drawings are mine. So my bridge looks more like a caterpillar doing something from my angle right now. But so when I think about these things, I'm really thinking about how those strengths are incorporated in a way different than they may have been perceived before. Because I hear people talk about their strengths all the time, but I'm not sure anybody ever really talks about how people use those strengths. Usually they're just descriptors or adjectives about people. And in Wraparound, we really want to use those things that people find interesting or fun, or things that they want to do, or that get them through those tough times. So, you know, when you think about this light bulb that you're seeing here, hopefully that does look like a light bulb. That really depicts that we want creativity in our planning when it comes to wraparound, high fidelity wraparound. We want to bring ideas in that may not have been tried before, if folks are interested in it. But we want to bring ideas in that actually are usable, that the families that are participating and partnering would really be interested in doing. We don't want a plan of care to be developed that families will look at and say, oh, no, we don't like this, and we don't feel like it matches us. So we ask folks within the wraparound teaming process to provide options and ideas that really match the culture and the strengths and the capabilities and the community resources that are available for families, so that these plans can be used and followed and sustainable. So those are our pictures. I'm not going to ask Mikey to keep those beautiful drawings that I created up any longer. One thing I'm not going to be is an artist, right?
Well, yeah, it's not necessarily about the skill. It's really the ideas and the details and those kinds of things. The words there are what, you know, really kind of stands out, and being able to use those symbols helps people like remember things a little bit better. Bridge or caterpillar, either way, it's going to be between reality and your dreams, right?
Yeah, that's what I love. That bridge really does represent something special in wraparound. Mikey mentioned the bridge with a collaborative idea behind it. But for me, the bridge represents how families do have the opportunity to bridge that space between what's happening now and what they would like to see happen. And
yeah,
so,
what they would like to see happen
yeah.
versus what, you know, maybe as providers of some kind of service, what we think they need to see happen.
Yeah, I'm glad you highlighted that. I said that they would like to see happen, because that is different. That is one of the big differences in wraparound and some other programs that families might have partnered with in the past, is that we really do listen for the family's input and want to get that from them.
So that's how we would describe wraparound. One of the reasons why it's important for us to share about this with you all is that there's some ways that people typically describe wraparound that certainly create some confusion, or at the very least, just a basic misunderstanding of what's happening. And the first is really to think about wrapping services around people, to use the term wraparound as like a metaphor of, we're going to put these things in place around you. And this is how sometimes I try to distinguish it by saying that there's an uppercase wraparound, like a capitalized wraparound, like an official wraparound that has research behind it. And then there's wraparound is somebody might use as a verb, which doesn't necessarily talk about a specific practice. It may be simply describing this idea of putting things around people. So if somebody's discharged from a hospital, we want them to have their next appointment with their prescriber. We want them to have a buddy to talk to. We want them, you know, somebody coming and bringing them breakfast the next morning. We're trying to put these things around them so that things are easier for them. And those can be well and good, but it's not the wraparound process that we're talking about here. And sometimes people will search online about wraparound, and you may get information about really that wraparound is a verb. And we're not trying to say that that's not helpful or useful, but that when we talk about that there's an evidence base around the process of wraparound, that there's a difference between those things. There's a more specific way of going about a wraparound process that doesn't involve plugging things around people. There's a matter of perspective if that's helpful. So to have those things around you, if it's warm and with good intentions, maybe it feels like you're in some big hug and it's comfortable. But there's another way of seeing it in which you're surrounded. You have nowhere else to go. They've trapped you. And that can sometimes be the experience whenever people aren't really able to have a voice in how those things are arranged. So we need to make sure that people understand that that metaphor is not the same thing as wraparound. Kim, you want to take the second one about how it's more intensive?
Yeah, so we quite often hear that it's souped up targeted case management. And we didn't poll earlier to see who might have experience with targeted case management or who had heard about targeted case management before. So if you haven't heard about it, then we apologize because we don't have definitions for all of these things today. But we often hear that it's a more intensive form of targeted case management. And it's not. It is a totally different process. It's different than therapy. It's different than targeted case management. It's evolved over time. And it's really just a structured planning process where we follow a series of steps to help families meet the things that will help them to move forward in the future without the things that are stopping them from being able to be happy right now. Things that are putting them at risk of being separated, things that are creating a space for them to not be able to engage with their communities. And so with High Fidelity Wraparound, we have to use those particular steps. It's called a process for a reason. So we utilize coaching, we utilize weekly supervision, we have very specific trainings, we have specific groups. So there are a lot more things that go into High Fidelity Wraparound in a different way. And one of the biggest differences is it's not an intensive form of targeted case management. It's a process that's created to impact families who have more intensive needs. So intensive is in there. It's just not the way that people typically describe it.
Yeah, so that's one of those assumptions that people have whenever they hear about it. I'm noticing a couple of questions in the Q&A about really about financing, and I think we'll get to those later. So I don't want you all to feel like we're ignoring you, but that we'll try to get back to those whenever we reach that point in the rest of the information that we have. But in a way, this idea of it being super targeted case management does touch a little bit on the financing or where it fits into how people think about what services are available in communities. Because there are some overlaps with what might be expected in targeted case management. As a part of training for folks who do targeted case management in Kentucky, you learn some about wraparound. You hear about the 10 foundational principles of wraparound. And if you're curious about any of that information, there's a great website that I'll pull up and share with folks so that you can really kind of dig into this to the degree that you're interested in it. But the National Wraparound Initiative is one place that people might go to learn more about wraparound and all of its sort of variations and history in our country. So on the National Wraparound Initiative, you can find information about those 10 foundational principles, which we won't spend time kind of reading off, but that information is there. And so the website would be nwi.pdx.edu. One of the interesting things about being a part of an ongoing wraparound community in the country is that you can learn about ongoing surveys with current events and issues. So one of the recent publications there was from December about is Wraparound losing its soul, which was just a simple survey. So it's not a scientific study or anything. And that in general, people felt kind of lukewarm about somewhat its soul is intact. But the three big issues that they identified with Wraparound had to do with workforce, which I think in Kentucky we can recognize the challenges, and we can share with you that there are job openings around the state for roles in Wraparound, particularly with High Fidelity Wraparound. Another issue was kind of bureaucratic and system barriers, financing kinds of things. And so in Kentucky, there's not a specific rate for doing a wraparound process, which is one of the challenges that I think targeted case management and our Kentucky Impact program has had in the past, with being able to stay true to wraparound's intentions and values. But the third issue had to do with people not really knowing wraparound. Not having the kind of structure to support it, the experience level to support it. And so that's one of the reasons why it's important for you all to be here to hear about it, whether you're going to have a direct role as someone facilitating a wraparound process or not. You may be asked to be a part of a wraparound team, whether as a provider or a professional, or it may be that somebody in your family has a need for a wraparound process and you're joining as a natural supporter as a family member. So we wanted to be able to address those issues. There's lots of other cool information on the National Wraparound Initiative's website for anybody who wants to know more. So there's definitely some challenges with how we've talked about wraparound over the years. One of my other favorite metaphors was we're not here to give people fish. We're here to teach them how to fish, instead. And that I always thought that was great because I like to fish. I like to eat fish, but to pretend that the kind of issues that families are facing at the moment are as clear and understandable as fishing is pretty insulting. And so while it's kind of a helpful metaphor in some contexts, it also misses the point that we often do wraparound because nobody knows what to do. And there's plenty of people who know how to fish.
Yeah, so thinking just a little bit more about that more intensive form of targeted case management that we brought up just a minute ago. Mikey was talking about some of the things that NWI could provide if you want to look at that online. But thinking about targeted case management in Kentucky, we actually bill targeted case management for High Fidelity Wraparound right now. And so within agencies, sometimes that creates a space for people to not understand that there is a difference, and they look at it as if you're billing for targeted case management, then why are you calling it High Fidelity Wraparound? And so as we do our fidelity monitoring and create a space for skills development and follow all the specific guidelines that were put in place by the department in order for High Fidelity Wraparound to be implemented within agencies. And that is something that we constantly look at. And so as we think about this system of care, that there is a space for the state agencies and for those doing the work on the ground and for families to come together and think about how we would move forward with High Fidelity Wraparound in the future in a way that it's carved out and paid for as High Fidelity Wraparound and not mixed up in the targeted case management payment system.
Yeah, we could definitely go deeper into the differences with targeted case management, but we'll save that. We'll come back around to that. So, wraparound is a great fit for a system of care. It's intended to respond to kids that have involvement with multiple systems, and has always kind of fit into that space. And in Kentucky, we've got a history of doing that through our impact program, which, you know, for those who like to keep count of acronyms, that's the Interagency Mobilization for Progress in Adolescent and Child Treatment. I memorized that many years ago, and I just love to show off, you know, how well I've held on to that bit of information.
Good job, Mikey.
That's right. But so our system of care has some some values that overlap nicely with how a wraparound process works. So, you know, system of care, you know, values youth engagement. In a wraparound process, kids are involved in the planning. So, you know, they're at team meetings, they're involved in helping to understand what needs to happen, who might be on the team. Kids have an important role to play. Sometimes we hear questions from people who are trying to practice, you know, a wraparound process about what if a kid has a whole lot of issues going on, they struggle to pay attention. Well, that's a reality that families are living with. We need to be able to include that in our planning process. They need to have a way of saying things, because their ownership over the decisions that get made will enhance the outcomes of any plan that you make with them. So Kim, what do you think about how wraparound relates to being family directed?
So with wraparound, and I'm just noticing in the chat box that we have someone who facilitated wraparound for a while, and she has some great comments, as well as some other comments in here from eliminating barriers, putting puzzle pieces together for better pictures, bridging those gaps. Yeah. So when we think about family direction, really, we want families to be at the table. One of the biggest things that we preach about in High Fidelity Wraparound is to have family access to the places where decisions are being made, because they need to be involved in that. Historically, you know, you think about planning for families in staffings or in rooms where the families weren't even there, and then you'd come out of the room of professionals and say, okay, family, go do this, and it will change your life and you'll be better. And then families came back and they weren't better, and you would blame them and say, oh, you didn't do what I told you to do. In wraparound and High Fidelity Wraparound, we want to make sure that the family voice is there and that they have options available to them. They should be able to say, yes, we think that will work, or we're willing to try that, or we understand this, or tell us what they want to do. So family direction is really important, and it matches that system of care value in a way that we won't even say we're doing wraparound if the family's not involved. With that, we want to make sure that we have intentional natural support system and community member involvement. And so those folks who are facilitating the process of High Fidelity Wraparound really purposefully have discussions with families about who is it that they turn to in times of need, or in times that they really are having a great time and want to share good news. We talk to families about what systems are involved and why it might be important for them to be at the table too, because you don't want system partners making decisions without input, right? Thinking about the community where they live, they should have access to be able to be involved in the things in their community that anybody else in the community could access. And so those people in the community that are important to them, or who might have input, or who they really just want to reach out to, or maybe want to be a part of something with, are folks that we intentionally push to be able to be on these teams and partner in a different way, so that there's relevant decisions made and that families and kids are in those conversations with the whole group of people and representatives of places that they might want to engage.
Yeah, so intentional means that there's really a process by which those folks get involved. So facilitators of the process are going to reach out, have conversations with them. They're going to include them in sort of the scheduling of child and family team meetings. They're going to help make sure that they make it there, that there's a balance of agendas and perspectives in those discussions, and that the interests of those other groups are understood, that you can put all those things in context.
Yep. And part of our process does involve the creation of something called a family story, which we won't be training you on today, but it's worth mentioning because it really does incorporate the perspectives of all those folks in a way that you can understand the history of the family, what's been going on, what the situational context is now, and how people have helped or where barriers are. So it's really a place where everybody comes together in a support process that really creates understanding, and they can see the value of each person. It's not just, hey, come on and join us. It's really, let's think about why it would be important for this person to be there, what they bring to the table, and what their history is with the family.
So Kim, I'm wondering how could peer support be involved in Wraparound?
That's a great question, Mikey. Peer support, you could have peer support for the youth or for the adults or the parents, caregivers within the wraparound process. And what's helpful about having peer support is they have lived experience, right? Peer support folks are people who can create a space to make it feel more normal for families as they engage in the process of wraparound. And some families have actually burned all their bridges to their natural supports. Maybe, they've called on that same person 100 times in the past, right? And they're just no longer answering their phones, or they're not really sure how to interact with certain system partners because they don't have the confidence, or they really have never even tried to interact with other system partners. So peer support specialists can really come in and help bridge some of that gap. They can offer support from that lived experience perspective and also help them as a guide in a way to engage within the wraparound process.
Yeah, as a therapist, there were a lot of things that I thought worked in the communities where I worked, but people with lived experience had a whole other way of seeing those things. And whenever you have that combined, set of understanding as a part of your team, then suggestions can come up. But that lived experience helps you recognize the reality of things. So there's been lots of great programs over the years that it's like, oh, that's a helpful resource, to look at. But if you have somebody who knows it, who has that local understanding of it, it can help save you a lot of frustration, and really things that go back to blaming families for how things don't work out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they can actually be that beacon that says, things can change, right? Because sometimes when families are referred to wraparound, they're at a place where they just don't know and they can't see how their family is going to be able to stay together and get through this. And peer support being there to say, look, we've gotten through it. There's a way. Where there's a will, there's a way, is really helpful. And we do have some champions in the audience here that I'm noticing in the chat box. I agree, peers are awesome.
Well, so one of the things that we recognized when we were initially putting together this stuff to share with you all is that not a lot of people had conversations with this community, of system of care about how things have transpired with the pandemic. Wraparound is a process that really is built around being in person, sharing the same room. So for those of you who had participated in it in the past, you'd probably recognize having Post-it notes up all over the room. Maybe there was a potluck, maybe a bunch of fidget and toys out on tables, and just kind of an atmosphere. Meetings might have been happening at schools or in families' homes or local library community rooms, conference rooms at various offices. We've had picnic kinds of team meetings that people have tried before. When the pandemic started and things were very uncertain, that really forced some changes in how people would kind of use a wraparound process. So Kim, I'm wondering, what do you remember about what we were doing in High Fidelity Wraparound before March of 2020?
Yeah, so before March of 2020, we were constantly on the road, and we were out partnering at agencies, community mental health centers across the state, doing skills workshops and partnering in a way where we could go join child and family team meetings where, there were representatives from the community and the natural supports of the family and other professionals and the youth and everyone there, where we could go observe for skills. And we were just on it all the time, right? We were out and about. And then in March of 2020, we got shut down. We were told no more travel. You're going to have to figure this out a different way. Your health is at risk. We want people to be safe. So we had to think outside the box. And really, I remember when we first heard about it, and we thought, oh no, what are we supposed to do now, right? How do we make sure wraparound can work when it's something that we're used to doing in person? And when Mikey said we had teams aren't composed in wraparound of just a youth and a caregiver and one professional or a facilitator. Teams in wraparound really involve numerous people, right? So you've got people from all parts of the family's life involved. So it's not just managing a couple of people, it's managing 5 or 6 or more. So thinking about how to keep that going was really interesting, because what happened was, as coaches across the state, Mikey and I were, there helping people build skills and supporting them to implement wraparound. But within those wraparound teams that had already been created, those people were planning, like, how are we going to make this happen? How are we going to create a space to keep this up? Because they recognized change was occurring. There was progress. They were invested and they had bought into wraparound. So I don't know of anybody that was really ready for virtual space meetings. So that got kind of built from the ground up. And it was amazing to watch, to see how invested people were to make a space for it to work. And when there were communities that didn't have access to internet or Wi-Fi, they worked around it in other ways. People were having meetings in gyms where they could have social distancing. They were having meetings on front porches. They were calling people in on their FaceTime, their friends. It was just amazing to see it happen. And that was one of the cool things about wraparound, is that the family was able to lead this, right? They were invested. They knew that these people were helpful and that their teaming process was really working for them, and that partnership was important. So they were like, let's figure this out. And they did what they could. It was really nice, because wraparound's built to be flexible. We didn't know we were going to have to be that flexible, but it's really a process where flexibility is important, and it's really individualized. So you looked at the strengths of different team members to see, like, who can help arrange this, who can make this happen. And so it was really cool to see it happen. We did have a facilitator. Again, in the chat box, we see it was honestly kind of traumatic. And it was like, you wonder what was going to happen, right? If you cared about wraparound and you wanted to see things continue, you didn't want it to grind to a halt, you were really thinking outside the box and you're looking like, what's next? And you're worried about your health, right? So when March 2020 happened and we started trying to figure out how to make it work, things got put into place where lots of virtual spaces were used, lots of creative thinking was used. And we still to this day find that there are meetings that are hybrids, where people who may not necessarily have ever been able to have met are joining still virtually while everybody else is sitting in the room. So it really did create a space for growth and change within the wraparound process. And Mikey, I'm just going to take up that whole time talking if you don't stop me. So what was your experience or anything that you'd like to share?
Well, I think that the idea that we use evidence-based practices was really stretched whenever the pandemic started. There's really no body of research about what kinds of children's mental health interventions are effective during a pandemic. We didn't have a whole lot of guidance from a research space about how we needed to adjust that process. And you know what? In wraparound, that's a-okay, because families are going to help us figure out what's useful, what's relevant, and we create our own evidence within those teams. It doesn't mean that your family's success is going to be something you can directly hand off to the next family and say, oh, do it just like we did. But the process is set up to be individualized. So those families who had 12 computers and multiple TV screens, they look like the media center at KET or something. If they want to do things virtually, they can pull things off virtually. That works. We'll do it that way. Those families who are like, we don't believe in cell phones, there's something wrong about that. In a wraparound process, you have that flexibility. We're not going to have to make everyone do everything the same way. And even today, as we look at survey data on people's preferences with telehealth, there's still a split. There's a lot of people who have found this convenient and useful, and it saves them time and all of that. And then there's another group of people who say it's just not as effective as an in-person meeting. Mm-hmm. And so if you're doing a wraparound process, you can accommodate both things. And so that was one of the really cool things, is that you had that embedded process for adjustments that I think makes it sustainable. And in the future, whatever kinds of disruptions we have with how things work or how we communicate, wraparound's well suited to be able to remain useful to that. It's often in the past been something that can be an important part of as our system of care evolves, to try to fit the different needs in communities. If you have a thriving wraparound community, there are other options. There are times where people need to be in a locked facility for safety and security. But there are a lot of times that they end up in those places because we can't really pull together what it takes for them to stay at home. And as a therapist, there are many times where if I just had a little bit more information, if there were just a few more people involved, we would have had a different option besides sending somebody off to a placement. And that's important because we like to think that those placements have, consistent positive results, and sometimes they do. But a lot of times there's real disruptions in relationships out of those decisions that can last many years. And as long as we're giving families options to make the right choices for them, I think we're doing the right thing. But not having wraparound available limits those options for sure. Anything else you wanted to say about wraparound and pandemics? Hopefully no more of them.
No, I think it's just one of those things that you know, when we think about the process of wraparound, it is a process. It's a structured process that there are always going to be the same pieces that are there, but it will look different for every family in every community. But facilitation of the process will mean that you're doing the same parts and pieces. So that didn't change in the pandemic, but wow, lots of other things did, right?
All right. So now let's talk about this shift, right? So from wraparound to high fidelity wraparound. And I think this is maybe a point for us to catch up on some of these kind of financing questions that have come up in the Q&A. So one thing to know about wraparound in Kentucky is that we have a great history of wraparound in our state, dating back to the 1990s. There's a lovely video still available on the Department of Behavioral Health website that you can, learn about the history of Kentucky Impact. It's only about 10 minutes long. Every time I watch it, I feel good about like being a part of this tradition here. There's so much for us to be proud of in that. But one of the reasons why we've made this shift to high fidelity wraparound is that there were forces that really have influenced how wraparound was delivered in the last 10, 15 years that have pulled it away from being able to do something. So the math of financing really comes into play here. Whenever we have targeted case managers who are expected to have 20 or more individuals that they're assigned to have contacts in a month, there's a reality to how you break down 40-hour work weeks with that many people. So you're limited in how many contacts you can have in that amount of time. So if we just imagine like an easy number to hold in our minds, 100 contacts, you split that between 20 or 25, right? That's 4 or 5 contacts per assigned person that you would have. So if we're saying that a wraparound team consists of all the family members, their system people, their natural supports, other community members, how do you make those connections with just 4 or 5 contacts? Some of those have to be with the identified, member, right? We're working in a medical model system. You have to have someone who has a chart and is our individual of record. So how do you fit that in? Now in high fidelity wraparound, we have set the maximum number of individuals assigned to a facilitator as 10. That's the max that you can have. So you split up those 100 contacts between 10 individuals, and now you can start to see the possibilities of a team coming together. So it's important that there's that difference in how many families are what we're really talking about. I'm trying to use the language of the record, but we're talking about kids and families. We're talking about my household. So to get involved at that level and think about that, when you try to fit it into this traditional targeted case management, which we've used to fund Kentucky Impact in the past, we have real limits. And those of you who do targeted case management, it's not to say that that's not a helpful thing. It has its place for sure. So we are focusing who we offer high fidelity wraparound for those people who meet a particular score in service intensity instruments that usually favor pretty high risk, lots of questions about their recovery environment or level of impairment. There's other dimensions to that. But we're looking for people who are really at the edge of being placed out of their home. And so in those situations, if you've done targeted case management for a while, you might be familiar with those referrals that come in and you freak out because you know how much work it would take for it to be successful. And you don't have that time. You don't have time to build this process. So we want to protect that. And that's what high fidelity wraparound was about. Kim, what am I missing here with with sort of the shift to high fidelity?
Well, I think you hit most of the highlights there. One thing to remember is, we will experience drift sometimes with anything that we try to do. We'll be trained in something. We'll see all the reasons that we should do it. We'll understand the values or the principles related to it, but we might get overwhelmed. And as he was talking about the targeted case management expectation of partnering with numerous families, double at least the number that we would partner with in high fidelity wraparound, you recognize that parts of the process had to fall off for people to be able to do what they needed to get done. The expectations for billing and all those things. So for high fidelity wraparound, recognizing that implementing the model and using all the process pieces really does lead to the best outcomes for families. The high fidelity piece means that they have more space to maintain that drift is minimized, and that there's consistent support to create a space for them to be able to do the process as intended. So that high fidelity piece really is recognition that there are families in those higher levels of need of service intensity that need more focus, that need that process, and that other, targeted case management options don't really work for them.
Yeah, so kind of looking at the Q&A, so how long are we typically involved with a family? We really think of it's typically no less than 6 months, and anything after 18 months usually is needing some attention to figure out how to transition. So there's not a good average there. In some ways our scale is so small that trying to get averages is like misleading to put numbers on it. But from the national research of how long wraparound goes, those are really what we're looking for. Less than 6 months, if people are able to wrap up successfully, it tends to mean that our criteria, maybe it wasn't as severe if it could be solved that quickly. And then if it goes beyond 18 months, it starts to become less connected to that original reason for referral. It's not intended as this long-term additional support for various other things. It's not to replace therapy. It's not to replace mentoring or peer support or any other types of things that people are doing to try to help kids and families. It has its own unique identity. And so we try to look for that sweet spot of that kind of time frame.
Yeah, and the limited time frame really does come from the fact that there's an intentional focus for the reason for referral, and that we don't change the goalposts all the time. You focus on that, and then you also build in a few months for transition options. When you see that there has been progress towards the outcomes, the desired outcomes, and that those needs have been met, and other things, all the measurements that we take in high fidelity wraparound, then you build in about a 3-month time to make sure that that change is sustainable, that teams have been shored up, that the right people are there for long-term change to be maintained, and that natural supports are represented. Because at the beginning of wraparound, we start out and you may have an 80-20 ratio of professionals to natural or community supports on teams. And by the end of the wraparound process, you would hope that that has shifted to where 80% of the team is now those natural supports and community members versus professionals being about 20% at that point. I see a question in the chat box about whether targeted case managers are able to make referrals for high fidelity services. And yeah, there are lots of ways for referrals to be made to high fidelity wraparound. Mikey mentioned some of the criteria. The service intensity instruments should be completed. There are going to be different system partners engaged with the family already, and there would be a high risk that the family would be moving to a space where they won't be together for much longer if things don't change. You're considering that out-of-home placement. There are procedures within each of the community mental health centers with referral I guess the policy and procedure is outlined within each agency. We don't have that. It's specific to agency. We can provide contact information for anybody who might have referrals or questions about referring, and make sure that you get in touch with the right person.
Yeah. So there's another question about double billing if someone's already got targeted case management, which kind of lines up with that question as well. And since High Fidelity Wraparound is still billing targeted case management and doing this process kind of alongside it, it could potentially be a double billing issue, but it depends on the target population of the individual that you would be referring. So through Aetna Sky, if folks are involved with DCBS, DJJ, fit the criteria for the Sky program, they may be able to participate in High Fidelity Wraparound through that model. You also would have to ask yourself, if you've been doing targeted case management, and there are some wraparound principles to that, are you really thinking that a more thorough wraparound, a more pure wraparound process is what they need? There's nothing stopping you from kind of stepping up to that, and you can use your agency to get some support through that. But that if you know that they meet the criteria for High Fidelity Wraparound, you may be having conversations about how and why you want to make that referral and potentially split that relationship. But all that's going to get into the individual circumstances, I think.
Yeah, and currently we are, we'll talk about this in a minute, but there are only the community mental health centers have been trained for the High Fidelity Wraparound model that Mikey and I coach around. So
training is one thing. What we're really talking about here is the ongoing coaching and supervision support and fidelity monitoring. That's the complicated part. You can sit in a webinar like this, or you can, watch a training online or something like that. It's not the same thing as having ongoing supervision and coaching around a High Fidelity Wraparound process, data collection of outcomes, data collection of fidelity measures where participants are asked about the quality of their wraparound experience. Those are all things that, if you think about how you would implement that, it's not something that an individual agency is going to be able to pull off. And so that's why we've been piloting it the way that we have. And as other things come together with our implementation effort, we'll see what options we have to expand that availability. Because we certainly don't have an availability statewide for everybody who needs it. And that's a real problem.
Yeah, that takes us perfectly into the next slide that we had, which is the history. In 2015 November of 2015 is when we started the project to implement High Fidelity Wraparound within the state. It was led and is still led by the Kentucky Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. And we still partner with the National Wraparound Implementation Center. Originally, it was at the University of Maryland. And in the last month, I think they have made their shift over, and the INWIC, National Wraparound Implementation Center, is now at the University of Connecticut. So UConn is their new home. But so, I'll be honest, when I first walked in 2015 to a training for a High Fidelity Wraparound, I thought I won't have to learn much. I already know this stuff. I know wraparound, no big deal. And I think the giant room full of people, like probably 90% of the people that came to that same first training had that same idea. We know this stuff. We do this stuff. We love wraparound. Boy, were we surprised. So in 2015, we all had our heads explode in a room in Lexington and recognized that we were getting ready to go for a fun ride. And it has been. So we've been trying to implement since 2015 and are excited about the trajectory. But as mentioned before, we are still looking for staff. So if you know folks who would be interested in partnering with families in High Fidelity Wraparound, send them our way.
Yeah, so we previously had hit on a lot of these points about how wraparound is kind of well suited for the near future in times that are uncertain, whether it's about public health responses and changing circumstances, or if it's complex, severe emotional disturbances of kids and what's available in their community changing. And those are things that Wraparound was really kind of built from the ground up to do, to respond to those kinds of circumstances. And so we also have this structure of coaching, supervision, to really support that, those kinds of adjustments to be made.
Yeah, so remembering that challenges were present and will always be present to a lot of the things that we try to do. But in Wraparound, we want to make sure that family perspectives and their preferences are really the lead in the planning process. Their voices are heard, they are able to take ownership of their plans, and that they have access to the people making decisions, right? That we really strategically use their strengths, that it's not just surface level strengths. We're not just describing them as funny or loving, that we're really digging down to figure out what are the things that they can actually use to create options that will help shift their lives into the direction that they want them to be. That we have teams that are composed of a robust mix of people from the family's life to the professionals who are involved, to their community partners. And that we really look for what was causing the most pain. What is it that was driving this behavior to occur in the first place? We don't focus on fixing a behavior. We focus on understanding what might be creating a space for that behavior to even need to happen in the first place. And we create a space where families aren't stuck just having to choose from what's available in their community mental health center. Because as the department is funding this and partnering with community mental health centers to do High Fidelity Wraparound, we recognize that families need options, right? So they'll have facilitators of the process from the community mental health center, but they're not limited to only those professionals that are working for that center to partner. So a therapist or clinician, whoever from any other agency could still be on their team and be part of that. They're not required to have any other service from the community mental health center to be able to engage in High Fidelity Wraparound. So that's one of those really interesting pieces of it, is we want to make sure that families have all opportunities to have the people that they want involved. And we don't tell them they can't do it because they don't, want who we want on there.
Yeah, their preferences are definitely leading that planning, and we see the differences sometimes is we just see the schedule of when people are having their child and family team meetings, and they're not at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. They're 7 o'clock on a Friday or whatever, because that's what fits the family's availability first. So that's where our priority is. In the past, we would sometimes have meetings that were scheduled so that it fit into a teacher's planning period, but it also meant that one of the caregivers wasn't able to participate because they were at work. So we have to have some flexibility in our schedules to make that work, to make things fit family preferences.
I'm looking at our time and I'm realizing that we are getting close to the end, but we do want to hit on a few more things, and we want to recognize that you've got some questions as well.
Yeah, so just a note about High Fidelity Wraparound in Kentucky. So there's a couple of practice models out there. We've been doing High Fidelity Wraparound according to an INWIC practice model since 2015, available through community mental health centers. In the last few years, Aetna Sky has implemented High Fidelity Wraparound. It's available in most of the state, but there are still bringing staff on to do that. And they're using a practice model out of the National Center for Innovation and Excellence, which is out of Florida. And so you may hear about it from there as well. Any of these key points you want to touch on before we go
No, we
straight
really
to
talked
Q&A?
about all this. Something that's really important that we recognize about wraparound is it's about a lot of shifts. We shift the way people think, we shift the way people interact, we shift the experience. So things should feel different and look different if you're part of a High Fidelity Wraparound team. And we've covered all of this, some of this uniqueness. If you want more information, I know some of you have to go, you've got big things to do the rest of the day. If you're looking for things to take with you about wraparound itself, remember we've got some sayings that go with it. Nothing about the family without the family. Families do not fail, plans do. And we always ask people just to trust the process. It's one of those things, just trust that process.
All right, well, let's make sure we pick up any questions that folks had asked that we hadn't already.
Do we have a slide that has our contact information there, Mikey?
We did, and I just hit it. Let me pull it up while we.
So you can reach out to us by email or phone if you need to, I guess. But our contact information is here. Diane Gruen-Kidd is our program administrator. Her email is there. Mikey is mlewis@ky.gov. Mine is kgilliam@ky.gov. Any questions that you had that we didn't get answered? I know there's a question here about contact info about doing a referral for a client. You can reach out to us individually and we can hook you up with that. I don't want to leave anybody hanging, but like I said, I know we're out of time. We're good at using up our time, aren't we?
I just want to say thank you. You guys are getting lots of kudos in the chat. For those of you that are still on, don't forget that you will not receive the session evaluation link today. It will not come today. It will not come tomorrow. It will come the first full week of February. If you were present for at least 90% of the session today. And I just want to say thank you guys both for being here. I really appreciate it. And so does our audience, as you can tell by all the kudos and claps and confetti that's being thrown your way. So thank you guys.